since we had our finals week worship night and we were able to gather and just sing praises. And I feel like this happens every time. Once we start singing, I'm like, oh man, I have missed this. I didn't realize it until it's just like, oh, it just feels good. So welcome back. It's great to see you all. And this year, I've been watching a lot of football. We got NFL Sunday ticket for free this year, and it's a great thing because they hooked me, and I'm probably going to pay too much money for it next year. But I watch a lot of football games, and I watch football games on Fox. And as a result, I've seen a commercial for this new TV show. I haven't watched it yet. I watched a little bit of it on YouTube today, but I'm really curious if it's popular or not. And so I'm wondering, how many of you have watched The Masked Singer? Not very many people. I only watched the first episode, guys. I'm sorry. You know? Wow. Like 4 people raised their hand. So either you're all just really afraid to raise your hand, or nobody is interested in that. So that's fine. I haven't watched it, except I will say though that as I did a little bit of research about the show. So do you guys even know what it is? Everybody's seen the commercials, right? He was like, yeah, I saw that, I wasn't interested. I did a little bit of looking today, and I guess the way it works is there's like 12 contestants, and they've all got the same costume they wear every week, or they're at least the same animal. Do they change their clothes for the costume?
It's the same costume, and they're all celebrities.
Yeah, they're celebrities, right? But each week, one of them gets eliminated and has to take off the mask, okay? And so, if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry. I'm going to spoil a little bit, okay? Catch up. But, so, 2 of the first 3 weeks, the person who was eliminated was tied to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Antonio Brown was week 1, and then Terry Bradshaw was week 3. But, and I don't know, we're a family. I just want you guys to know that when I approached my resident Steelers fan and asked if he had paid attention to this show, he had. Okay. He was very aware. Yes, Caleb Winslow, the biggest Steelers fan that I've ever met. He in fact told me that Terry Bradshaw is actually a pretty good singer, has produced some albums. So if you don't know who Terry Bradshaw is, that's not interesting to you. I was surprised. Okay. Anyway, all right. See this? You guys are just like, I'm not even interested in that show. Why are you going on and on about it? Okay. Well, it was just intriguing to me that here's a show. The whole point of the show, right, is to try to figure out who this person really is. Right? They give some clues about them, and I think maybe even the songs. I thought, again, if you're not a football fan, then some of this, I'm sorry, just bear with me, okay? But Antonio Brown sang My Prerogative, which I thought was a pretty fitting song, if you know anything about the NFL. Okay, there you go. There was some spits in. Okay. But the whole point is they're trying to figure out who these people are. And I guess there's still 9 contestants, and that's the big question mark. Who are these people? Okay, and I was intrigued because on the one hand, here's a show that's all about trying to figure out, who's under the mask, who is this person really, and yet I think to some extent, I think we are all tempted to put some kind of a mask on to present ourselves, maybe not our real self, to the people around us. That maybe who we are underneath isn't exactly what people actually see. The difference is nobody's really trying to figure it out. Right? We're not celebrities, we're not on TV. But I think there's a temptation for all of us to be somebody different on the outside than what we actually are on the inside. And so tonight, as we're going to continue on, we're just going to pick up where we left off. Last semester, we were walking through 2 Corinthians, and we're going to pick up tonight at 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And this passage tonight, as we dig into this passage, I love, there's just a couple of course I love a lot of God's Word, and I love a lot of 2 Corinthians, but this is a passage especially that it's just been really encouraging and challenging to me. And I think this passage really gets down to this idea of who are you really? Not just who do you say that you are, or what's the mask that you put on the front that you want people to see, but what's reality in your life? What's underneath? And so I thought this was fitting tonight as we begin a new semester to really kind of do sort of a spiritual checkup. And I think as Paul is challenging these Christians at Corinth on some issues in their lives, I think that there's a real correlation for us today. I think there's three things that I see here that are really, they kind of manifest themselves externally, but for the most part, these are things that are going on under the surface. And only you know for sure, you and God know for sure, where you're at in regards to these things. But I think if we can get these things grow in our lives, these things that I think are really important to the Lord, then I think, guys, God can do some amazing things. Here we stand again, we're at the beginning of a semester, and it's full of possibility, and we're also at the beginning of a new year, where people make all kinds of new resolutions, right? New year, new me, those kinds of things. But I think if we will walk in obedience to the Lord, if we will develop these three things in our lives, I think we can see God do some really cool things in us and through us this semester at Northwest. All right? So follow along with me. Let's go ahead. We're going to read the first 15 verses of 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And I got a new Bible, and it has bigger print. All right? So no more of that. I can't read my Bible anymore. Someday I'll probably just get glasses, but this is good for now. Just push it off as much as I can. All right? All right, this is 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. Paul writes, he says, "We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. And this not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. Accordingly, we urged Titus that as he had started, so he should complete among you this act of grace. But as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in all earnestness, and in our love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also. I say this not as a command, but to prove by the earnestness of others that your love is also genuine. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. And in this matter I give my judgment. This benefits you, who a year ago started not only to do this work, but also to desire to do it. So now finish doing it as well, so that your readiness in desiring it may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. For if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but that as a matter of fairness, your abundance at the present time should supply their need, so that their abundance may supply your needs, so that there may be fairness. As it is written, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. All right. So I'm not going to recap the whole of 2 Corinthians, what we talked about, but just here in this passage, just to bring you up to speed of what's going on, that Paul, there's a famine, there's some sort of a hardship that the church of Jerusalem is facing, and so it's in Paul's heart to take a collection for them from the other churches. And so Paul's been working on this for quite a while. He has already written to them about this in 1 Corinthians, so you can go to 1 Corinthians 16, and you can read about this offering that Paul is collecting from these churches that they have money, and these churches over here don't. And so Paul's like, let's take a collection, and let's relieve this burden that they have. And so we see here, right, that it's been a year. This is a long process. It's not, I mean, they can't just PayPal one another or like Venmo, right? That's a thing? I haven't tried that one just yet. I gotta catch up, okay? But they didn't have any of those options. So Paul actually had to travel around, and then, there's a lot of questions. I mean, if we're gonna send this money, how do we know it's gonna get there? How do we know this is all on the up and up? And so some churches would send like a person or two to go along with Paul. And so it's a big process. And so initially when they heard about this need, they got all fired up. They're like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And then now, maybe, we don't know for sure, maybe now they're not quite as well off as they were before. Maybe money's got a little bit tighter. But for whatever reason, they're not quite as excited as they were when they made this commitment. And so Paul is challenging them to follow through and do what it is that they said they were going to do. All right? Wow. follow through and do what you said you were going to do. Man, is that a thing that we need to grow? Is that a thing we need to work on? Number one thing that I really feel like, guys, as we're looking at this passage tonight, there are three characteristics, I think three benchmarks, three internal realities that if these things are in place, they're going to take you far as a Christian. They're going to take you far in your walk with God. They're going to manifest themselves in fruit. And I'll just tell you what they are up front. We're going to talk about integrity, we're going to talk about generosity, and we're going to talk about servanthood tonight. Three things that God desires to work in us. Because God's great work in us, for those of us who have surrendered ourselves to Christ, those of us who name Jesus as Lord, the great work that God's doing is transforming us to be like Jesus. And that work that He does that inside. And sometimes maybe we're not sure how much work has gotten done. And so these, again, are some benchmarks. And so tonight I want you to think about this, to evaluate yourself. I'm not fit to be your judge. I'm not judging you. And I'm not asking you to judge the person next to you. I'm asking you to think about yourself tonight in regards to these things with sober judgment. And so I want to give you kind of a couple of kind of introductory parameters before we get rolling on this first one. Okay? First of all, I want to say, if you feel like, you know what, I am a person of my word. All right? I want to say it's okay to give yourself a passing grade. All right? You don't have to you don't have to be that I'm a worm, I suck, I'm so terrible. Like, it's okay to feel like, hey, I'm pretty generous. Like, if that's right before God, if that's how you really are, then praise God for that. I would still I think, first of all, you can be thankful for that, you can acknowledge that, and then you can grow in that. All right? Maybe tonight you're challenged. You're like, I'm not really, that's just not been me. And I think there's kind of two different ways you can react to that. Some of you, it's going to be a great opportunity to pray about it and to try to walk in obedience. I'm going to try to give you guys some real practical things that I think will help you. And honestly, for some of you, maybe you're like, you know what? I'm not generous, and I just don't care. I just don't really desire to be generous like Jesus. All right? Well, I would just tell you, sometimes when we don't want to, we need to pray for the desire. Like, if you're willing to surrender, there was a lady at church one time who said, sometimes we got to surrender our surrender. You can say, Lord, I want to be a generous person. And again, just pray that prayer. Just say, Lord, I want to change, but right now I'm just stuck for whatever reason. Just pray about that. Just give that to God. Karen shared this many times. I'm just saying, God, I want a greater desire for your word. And that prayer was answered, right?
Yep.
So you can pray that prayer. All right. So first of all, to be a person of your word. See, here's the thing. God desires to make us like Himself. That's the great work that He's doing. And God always keeps His word. And that, I think, is why it's so important to God that we are people of our words and we're people of integrity. Because that's who He is. And I've got a list of verses. All right. I'm only going to give you these two. Maybe just this one. Numbers 23:19, which I love that reference, right? I know. If you've seen Monsters, Inc., you know 23:19. All right? So that would be a great memory verse. You just got to remember the numbers part. You're never going to forget the number reference. Okay, Numbers 23:19. Every time I say it, you're just going to laugh. This is what it says. It says, God is not a man that He should lie, nor a son of man that He should change His mind. Has He spoken, and then will He not do it? Does He speak and not fulfill? Like God is not like us. We're so used to people not keeping their word that maybe we project that on God and we think that God's like that. But you can take God's word to the bank. And man, guys, I've got verse after verse after verse here about God's faithfulness, about God's trustworthiness. That's one of the reasons why I think it's so important for you to know God's word. Like, what is it that God has promised to do? What is it that God has said about Himself? What is it that God has said about you? What is it that God has said that He will do for you in Christ? Because He'll do it. God is faithful. And therefore, God desires for us to be that way as well. And I'll tell you, right? It's easier to make a promise than it is to deliver on that promise. We've probably all experienced some of that. Proverbs 20 verse 6, it says, "Many a man proclaims his own steadfast love, but a faithful man who can find?" Many people proclaim to have this great love, but who can find someone who's just faithful? Someone who just follows through. And I'm sure I'm one of the few Seinfeld fans in the room. It's okay. But it's aged pretty well if you decide to catch up. But he has this sketch. I could have just told this story, but I feel like I need to give him credit for this story. But he has a bit that he does where he talks about going out and eating at a restaurant. You know, and how at the beginning, right, when you sit down to eat, it's like money is no object, and let's get some more appetizers, bring some more drinks, and let's have the steak, and then at the end, right, how weird is it, that the bill comes at the end, and he's like, why am I paying for this? I'm not hungry. What does this look right to you? And at the beginning, it's like full of possibility. It's like, and I realize that that's not as true for you guys. Most of you guys probably go to the restaurant and you're just like, oh man, what can I actually afford? But right? So I don't know if that's a one-to-one for college ministry. But it is interesting to me that that's one of the only things in life where you pay for it after you've already used it. Almost every single thing in life is, you go to the store, you buy the item, and then you get to take it home and use it up. You get to take it home and enjoy it. But food, you eat it. And that's why, my brothers, when I was a kid, both of my brothers worked at a pizza place. They worked at Pizza Inn in Kansas City, Kansas. And there would be people who would try to dine and dash. And they would eat, and then they would try to get out without paying. And so, my brothers have stories about chasing people down and, guys who would eat, and then they're at the Pac-Man, the little arcade by the front door, and they're just watching, they're waiting, and you probably can't even do that nowadays. Probably it's illegal for you to tackle somebody or do something like that, but, back in the good old days, the wild, wild west of, pizza places. And, but here's the thing, guys, and I want you to kind of have that, because I imagine, that's wrong, and I doubt that's ever been a serious temptation for you to dine and dash. Right, where you eat, and then you're like, can we sneak out? Maybe, I don't know, maybe you've done that to one of your friends once, where all but one of you left. You're like, that might be funny once, right? Your friend will never trust you again. But we wouldn't dine and dash. Right? We wouldn't do that. That's illegal. And yet, when it comes to keeping our word, we do it all the time. We tell people we'll do something, and then when the bill comes, when it's time to deliver, we're nowhere to be found. And who can find a faithful person? Who can find that person? And really, when it comes to integrity, I understand that maybe it's not always easy to follow through, but your credibility is at stake. And that may not matter to you. I hope it does. Because this is really who you are. This is what people know about you. And when you don't keep your word, you lose credibility. And I'm guessing we have all experienced that. In fact, we probably all have somebody, maybe you call them a friend, maybe it's just somebody you know of, that they're not going to come through. That they're not going to follow through. That they're going to, you smile and nod, and it's an inside, maybe everybody knows. It's an outside joke, right? Everybody knows the joke. But nobody takes him seriously. And I was just saying, I don't know about you, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person that everybody's like, oh yeah, Jason, he said that, but it's never going to happen. He's not going to keep his word. You can't trust him. Man, it hurts, right? It hurts because when you don't keep your word, you let people down. And people are counting on you to do what you said you would do. And here, Paul was counting on the Corinthians to come through. That there are people who are really hurting, who are going through some tough times. And you guys, you made a big old deal at the front end, but now that the bills come due, you're starting to waffle. And these churches need your help. And so what's going to happen? Again, I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of that, where somebody hasn't come through, somebody's let you down. Maybe too many times. Maybe you become so cynical you don't trust anybody. And maybe I would even hear your story and say, I don't blame you. But I'm not talking about whether or not you can trust other people. Tonight I'm asking, can you be trusted? Are you a person of integrity? Do you keep your word? And I think there's some things we can do to try to get better at this. All right? So a couple of things. How does this develop in our lives? Because I hope that we want to be that way. I mean, I'm so thankful that God is faithful. I'm so thankful that God never changes. I take that to the bank all the time. I rely on God's promises and God's word all the time. It comforts me, it encourages me. And there are people in my life that I'm so thankful that I can rely on them, that they're faithful, that they're people of integrity, that they reflect the nature of Christ in that way. And so a couple of things. If this is something that you struggle with, first of all, I'm going to say, don't say yes to everything. It's easy to kind of get into like a people-pleasing mode where you just want to make people happy, you want to meet every need, but here's the thing, when you say yes to everything, you spread yourself too thin. And then you can't keep all your commitments. And you're guaranteed to let people down. And I was just really intrigued, because sometimes you read things in the Bible and you're like, man, I don't remember reading that. And as I was rereading 1 Corinthians, because I was reading about the collection, and in 1 Corinthians 16, I was like, I don't remember reading this. So, hold on. New Bible. All right. So in 1 Corinthians 16, Paul's talking about the collection, right? And then in verse 12, I was just really intrigued by this. It says, now concerning our brother Apollos, this is Paul writing, he says, I strongly urged him to visit you with the other brothers, but it was not at all his will to come now. He will come when he has opportunity. I was like, wow. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, man, here's the Apostle Paul, and he's like, man, I really want you to go visit this church. And he says, no. What? You can't do that. You can't say no. I was amazed. I'm like, man, that's really cool that Apollos would say, you know what, that's not what I need to do right now. He says, I'll do that later when I have time. And we don't know what his prior commitments are. We don't know what it was that he was doing. I'm sure he did very good. It wasn't just, no, I don't like those people. I'm going to stay here on the couch and take another nap. No, it was, I have something else that I've already signed up for. And so, Paul, as much as I know you want me to do that, I can't do that right now. And so he said no. Like, let's try something. Okay? This is going to be interactive for just a moment. Okay? It's not going to hurt, I promise. I just want everybody to say this word with me, okay? We're going to say no. Okay? Can you say it with me? Just say no. That was great. Let's just try one more time. No. All right? It's funny, right? Because when you're like, I don't know, maybe a 2-year-old, you said that a lot. That's one of the first words that you learn to say back to your parents. No. All right? But later on in life, sometimes we feel like we can't say that anymore. That it's not okay. That I have to say yes to every single thing that comes up. And so if Apollos didn't have to say yes to Paul, if he had a good reason, you don't have to say yes to everything either. All right? Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. He says, whatever it is that you're saying, stick with it. Be a person of integrity. Don't be somebody who nobody knows for sure if you're going to come through. Right? Now, I will say we have to be willing to make some commitments. You don't get a free pass to say no to everything. I do think we live in that age, right, where we have the fear of missing out. And so people don't want to make a commitment because, like, as soon as I commit to that, something else is going to come along and like, man, I wish I had done that instead. So we don't make commitments. And so there's a middle ground in between those two things where I say no to everything, or I'm afraid to say yes to anything. Where we want to say yes to the right things and say no to the wrong things, I guess, or to say no to the things we should say no to. Okay? And so we don't say yes to everything. We need to be willing to say no when we need to say no, but we need to be willing to pay a price. Psalm 15 talks about who is it who is able to ascend the holy hill? Who is the God who's the righteous person? In Psalm 15:4, David writes this, and one of the things he gives a characteristic of the godly person, the righteous person, he says they keep their word even when it hurts. Even when it costs them. They're a person of integrity. They're going to do what they said they're going to do. And so just be ready. Just know that there's going to be a time when you make a commitment and then something else will come along. Something better will come along. And you'll have to say no. Because there are people who are counting on you because you gave your word. And it's going to hurt, and it's going to be tough, and you're like, man, because that's integrity. That's where you're developing that character that reflects the character and nature of God. And then the last thing, how do we develop this in our lives? Like honestly, when you mess up, don't make excuses. Don't blame somebody else. Just make it right. Just own it, confess it, and make it right. Colossians 3:13 says that we're to bear with one another and we're to forgive one another. That tells me there are going to be times when it's a pain to put up with each other. There's going to be times when we let each other down. There's going to be times when we fail. And so that's one of the great things about the body of Christ. When it's functioning like it's supposed to, it's a grace place. It's a place where, man, when I go to Sammy and say, hey, Sammy, I'm sorry, I totally dropped the ball, I know Sammy's not going to punch me in the face. If you do, Jesus is going to get you. No, you're going to forgive me. Because that's what Jesus calls you to do. And we're going to be restored, and we're going to grow in grace, and we're going to grow in love for one another, and really it's going to help me to have integrity. So this is the first thing that really sticks out to me in this passage. It's just this Paul saying, hey guys, you wanted to give, you said you were going to give, now the bill comes and it's kind of tough, and I'm saying, follow through. Do what you said you were going to do. Like, people are counting on you. All right, that's the first thing. The next thing that I see in this passage, that I think is important to the Lord, it's important that we develop in our lives, is to be a generous giver. Be generous. Now, first thing I have to point out, right, is that God is generous. And all of these things, and I've said this before, you may not have heard me say this if you haven't been here much, but I'll never forget going through the Dave Ramsey class, Financial Peace University, and the last one, Dave talks about giving, and he says, God wants you to give because God is a giver. And he wants you to be like him. And I just started realizing in that moment, like a light bulb, like so many light bulbs went on, like I was blinded by the light. Like, God wants you to forgive. Why? Because he's forgiving. God wants you to be patient. Why? Because he's patient. God wants you to be kind. Why? Because he is kind. It's like, oh my goodness. What God calls me to do in my life is to be like him in all these areas. God wants me to have integrity because he has integrity. And God wants me to be a generous giver because that's what he is. And so I reflect his character and his nature when I live that out. Of course, you probably know John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave. He gave his son. He gave the thing that was most precious and dear to him. James 1:5 says that if you lack wisdom, ask God who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given. And I could go through again. I decided I wasn't going to blow you into all these verses, but so many verses that God just is generous, that he gives and he gives and he gives so much. Now, I realize this topic of giving is, you may have already tuned me out, okay? Because we're college students, we don't have any money. I'll give someday, you know. Someday, when I'm also trying to pay off my student loans, I'll give a little bit, all right? I'm just telling you that generosity is not tied to being rich, okay? Maybe we tend to think of it, and I think it's probably a temptation for rich people to be stingy. You know what? Poor people can be stingy. Rich people can be generous. Poor people can be generous. I tell you, I've traveled a little bit around the world, and I've been in a few environments with some people in other countries who were poor, and they wanted to give me everything they had. I was like, what are you doing? Keep that. But when you would go into their home, it was just their custom to be generous. And so they wanted to give you some valuable thing. And I'm like, man, keep that. They were poor, but they were generous. They wanted to be a blessing. And so generosity, guys, is not tied to being rich. And Paul says that here. This is one of my favorite things about this passage because I think this so applies to students. Because we could easily think, well, I don't have anything. I don't have enough. What can I give that would make any kind of a difference? And he says here, let me see. In verse 11, he says, finish doing this so that your readiness and desiring it may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. For if the readiness is there, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. Like, if you barely got any money to your name, God's not expecting you to write a $5,000 check. That's not the point. God knows what you do have, and what you do have is something. And so, Jesus calls us to give. You can be a poor college student and still be generous. Jesus says in Matthew 6, he says, when you give, not if you give. And I want to pause here because sometimes, and I've said this before again, but sometimes people say, well, I give of my time. You know? And I want to tell you guys, that's awesome, and there's a word for that, and it's called serving. Okay? That's serving. Giving your time and going and volunteering, helping somebody out. Giving is financial. It doesn't necessarily be money. You might be giving away a coat. You might be giving away a couch. You might be giving away a phone. I don't know. But there's a monetary value tied to giving. And giving is one of those things because it's such a heart check. Because we can get real tied to the stuff of this world. So Jesus calls us to give. So how do we become generous? How can we develop this in our lives? Okay, well, first of all, I think one thing that's really helpful is for us to begin to recognize what is truly valuable. Because the things of this world, right, the riches and the gold and all of that, it's so shiny and it's tempting and it seems like something that I just got to have, and I got to have more and more, and I got to chase after it with all that I am. Okay? When Matthew 6, let me flip back here real quick. Matthew 6, verse 19. This is in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is teaching about a lot of things. And Jesus talks about money quite a bit, because we understand that. He's talking our language now. And so, in Matthew 6, starting in verse 19, Jesus said, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And Jesus is saying here, like, the things of earth, its riches, they're so temporary. They break down, they get destroyed, they get stolen, they run out. But he says your heavenly treasures are secure and they're eternal. And he says this incredible thing. He says, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. And it always brings me back to this song, right? I don't know if it's Snoop Dogg, but it's I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind. And that's it, because that's a treasure. And so the thing that you treasure, the thing that you value, that's where your heart's going to be. And so we have to get it away from this idea what the world says, that it's all about dollars. And it's the money. It's not. But that's a temporary thing. In fact, so much so, in Luke 16, Jesus says this. He's talking about being faithful with money. And he says, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? He said, if you haven't been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will give you true riches? What is actually valuable? Like, money is actually like a test. Can you be trusted with this? Because Jesus, if I'm going to give you something that's actually valuable, we'll start with this stuff that really doesn't matter that much, that the world says is valuable. I heard this saying one time, all I want is a chance to prove that money can't buy me happiness. I just give you the shot, right? It doesn't, but it captures our heart, and we become a slave to it. And so everything, guys, whether it's money or it's the things that you own, it's your cars, it's your possessions. It can either be an idol or it can be a tool. It can be an idol is something that you bow down, that you worship, that you serve, that you're a slave to, or it can be something that can be used for God's kingdom. And so it's a test. Our possessions are a test. And so first of all, we just need to recognize that those things, what really matters, and Jesus is saying there, part of what he says in Matthew 6, he says, when you pray, your Father will reward you. When you give, your Father will reward you. When you fast, your Father will reward you. He says these things are things that really matter. Things that you do for the Lord are valuable things. The way that you serve other people, those are valuable things. Those are eternal things. Money just disappears. And there have been a whole lot of rich people who have lived and died. Can't take it with you. And so, how do we develop generosity? First of all, let's see what actually matters. What's really valuable. The stuff that we have are tools to be used for the kingdom. Secondly, really, I mean, this is the first thing, and he says this about the Macedonians. He says, give yourselves to the Lord. Like just fully surrender yourself and submit yourself to Jesus. When we say, you know what, I'm going to surrender to you, everything else starts to fall into place. It puts things in perspective. It reminds me to trust him. It makes my priority obedience. I mean, at one point Jesus says, you can't serve me and money. So which is it going to be? And if I choose to serve him, it sets me, it releases me from this servitude to worldly riches. And so then I can start giving. Just start giving. Luke 16:10. Jesus said, whoever is faithful in little can be faithful with much. And so again to the Corinthians, Paul says, look guys, if you don't have as much money as you used to have, that's fine. Give what you can give. God, that's all God is asking you to do, to be faithful in giving. And so, we don't pass the plate here. We're not a church. We're not meant to be a supplement, we are a supplement. We're not meant to be a replacement for the local church. And so, you should all be given to whatever church you're a part of, and you need to be a part of a church somewhere. All right? And if you can only put $1, if you can only put you get 2 quarters you can rub together, and you put them in an offering. If you can say before God, this is what I can give today. That's all right. This week, Jonathan and I started exercising together. And we've been going to the field house at like 8 in the morning, and if anybody wants to start joining us, it's a big field house. We got room for all of you. Okay? All right? And I was just reminiscing and talking about how there was years ago when I was in good shape, and I went with the high school, the church youth group went out to Mozingo, and there's this big climbing tower out there. And so I climbed to the top of the tower. One of the youth had challenged me. When you get to the top of the tower, they say, can I do 20 push-ups or something like that? And so I got to the top of the tower, and I was in good shape. I've been doing P90X, I've been working out. And so I got up there and I was like, 20 push-ups, that's ridiculous. So I started doing push-ups, and I did 20, I did 30, I did 40, and I didn't think I could make it all the way to 60, so I was like, I'll just stop at 50. So I knocked out 50 push-ups, and I got down, and the guy was like, hey, you just did 1 push-up for every foot that you climbed. It's 50 feet high. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And so it's kind of sad because like, we're doing 50 push-ups now, and I do 5 sets of 10 push-ups. All right? That's disappointing, okay? All right? What am I talking about? Why do I say that? Because here's the deal. You know how you get to where you can do 50 push-ups in a row? You start smaller. And I don't know how long it's going to take me. I'm planning to get back to where I was a bunch of years ago. And so, how do you become a real generous giver? Just start giving a little bit, guys. That's how you start developing your giving muscles. You got to start somewhere. And you know what? It might hurt. You might be sore from giving. But that's okay. Because you're becoming what God wants you to be. You're growing into someone who can give and be generous. Okay? So you just start. Just start giving. Like every single one of you. And maybe, depending on like the way you get paid, the way money works, maybe you don't put something in every single time. And maybe some churches are different in the way they take offering. But regardless, regularly start giving. Alright? That should be a part of every believer's life. And it's not about how much you're giving, it's about being faithful. Give what you can. Just a little bit, I think Jesus is pleased with that. There's a story. Little old woman, she put in 2 pennies. And Jesus gets up. He was watching the offering. I didn't plan on talking about this. He's watching the offering. I just remember this story. This is one of the only times this happens in all the Gospels. And he's like, hey. He goes over here and he's like to the disciples, like, hey, guys, did you see that? Did you see what just happened? He said, that woman, she put in more money than everybody else. You know the disciples are going to have another like, no, she didn't. It's like, Jesus, you've been in the sun too long. That's not how it works. And so I'm telling you, giving isn't about the dollar amount. It's about your heart, and it's about being faithful. All right? She gave out of her poverty, and Jesus stood up and noticed. He's like, wow, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. A little old lady who put 2 pennies in the offering. None of us would be impressed by that. So if you think you don't have much to give, Jesus is delighted when you do it anyway. Okay? All right, last thing in this passage that I think just gets to the heart of what it means to follow Christ, and what I think, man, if we can get a hold of this in our lives more and more, there's just no end to the way God will use us for His glory. And that is that we live for the benefit of other people. That our lives are not about ourselves. And of course, again, Jesus embodies this. Jesus lived this out. That He came to serve. Mark 10:45. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And to give His life as a ransom for many. That's why Jesus came. Was to be a servant. And if we take Jesus at His word, He said it's more blessed to give than to receive. And I don't know if you've ever had that privilege. Acts 20:35, the words of Jesus, more blessed to give than to receive. If you've ever been able to do that, if you've been able to meet a need in somebody else's life, it is so fun. It is one of the coolest things. There's been at least a couple times in my life when I've had the means to meet a need and God just opened a door and I could say, here you go. Or sometimes even meeting a need anonymously, and then your friend comes and tells you, and they don't know it was you, and you don't tell them, and you just get to celebrate together. It's so fun. I love it, and it is. It's really more blessed. To be used by God in that way is incredible. And so again, we got to get out of that mindset that would be nice if somebody would do something for me. Man, it's nice when you do something for someone else. And in all of these things, like, yeah, it would be great if the people that you interact with would keep their word, but you don't have any control over that. There's nothing you can do about that. But the people that interact with you, do they experience somebody who keeps their word? People that interact with you, do they experience somebody who's generous? The people that interact with you, do they experience someone who lives to serve others, to benefit other people? Because this is the Christ life. This is why Jesus came. This is what He calls us to be and to do, is to serve others, to live for the benefit of other people. And so just as is God really serious about this? There's this story that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 12. And it's a heavy story. But I'll read it to you. God's serious about this. God doesn't give to you in abundance so you can hoard it for yourself. In Luke 12, Jesus tells this story. It says, He told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. I mean, it sounds like an American, right? And this is, listen, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And this is what Jesus ends the story with. He says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. God's serious about this. That God blesses people abundantly, and He expects us to use that to bless others. And I'm not saying you can't buy something nice. I'm not saying you can't have nice things. But you guys understand, right? This guy, he's like, it's all for me. That is not the Jesus way. It's not what God calls us to do. And guys, that is such a miserable, lonely existence. I think that person will never know how blessed it is to give. What a joy it is. The joy of God that you experience. So last thing, how do we develop this? How do we become more others-focused in our life? Okay? Again, a lot of these things first start with a change of thinking. How do we think about things? What do we think are treasures? How do we go about giving our word? When do we commit to things? Here, guys, we need to embrace the way of Christ. That there's a difference. Okay, it says in Philippians 2:7, it says that Jesus took on the very nature of a servant. And Philippians 2:3 and 4 is where it says, it says, do not do anything out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Do not look only to your own interest, but also look to the interests of others. He says your attitude should be the same as Jesus. You should have the same kind of an attitude. And I think, we can kind of have this attitude, well, I might come and help you clean up a little bit, but I'm not your maid. Okay, I'm not a maid. I might give you a ride once, but I'm not like a taxi driver here. Okay? I might even take out the trash, but I'm not a garbage man. That's something I might do, but that's not who I am. And I think some people kind of have that attitude as a Christian, like, I might serve, but I'm not a servant. It's like this sort of a part-time Christ-likeness. And that's not how it's supposed to work. That helping others isn't just something that we do, it's who we are. That's who Jesus, that wasn't just something that Jesus did for some time. That was his purpose. That was his identity. Like, he took on the form of a servant. When he washed the disciples' feet, I know that was weird for them, but he was just being him. That was just a normal part of his earthly life, that he chose to lay aside his glory and just serve as a servant. And so, that's the way of Christ. And that's what he calls us to do. And if I'll just embrace that, instead of sort of having this kind of, I've got a schedule, kind of get your class schedule, like, Jesus, here's my serve schedule. And you can send some problems my way from like 12 to 3. But after that, I don't want any eruptions, I don't want any problems, I don't want any needs. Right? You're going to have a very miserable Christian life that way. Because God is just going to laugh at your little schedule. It's probably going to be like, okay, 12 to 3, I got it, I won't bother you. Right? I'm going to take all those other times when you're just so busy and people are going to have a need. And so embrace it. Embrace the way of Christ. Most of you, not all of you, get a name tag, right? You write your name on there. I was thinking maybe we need a new name tag. Or maybe you need like a new ID or some business cards or something. And it just needs to say, Bruce DeWitt, servant. Or how about this? How about Courtney Pratt, hands and feet of Jesus? Like, that's what we're called to be. And that's, I don't know, I guess if we did this, like if we all lived this way, like what kind of a community would we be? What kind of an impact would that make? Okay, so that's the first thing. Just own it. Just realize it and get on board with what God wants you to be. Second thing is to be intentional. Like, have a plan. I think this is pretty cool. Again, I go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 16, and Paul told them, he's like, hey guys, here's what I'd like you to do, because we're taking this collection. Just every week, just set aside a little bit of money. Just set aside a little bit of money every week, so that when I come, the money will be ready. And that says to me that they would make small intentional investments so they can meet a need. And what would it be like? I just think this would be pretty cool if some of you guys, maybe you just regularly set aside a small amount. Maybe it's I don't know if you've ever done that, right? Where you take all your change to the bank, and they always ask you what? You take in your change, and what do they say? Okay, well, they do ask you how you want the cash. Okay, well, they always say to me is, how much do you think it is? No? Am I the only one? What? Man, you guys got some really boring and impersonal banks. Okay, show of hands. I can't believe this. If you've had them ask you how much you think it is, please. Okay, see a few of us. All right. When they say that, I feel so much pressure. I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want to sound stupid. I'm going to say it, and I'm going to be way off, right? Of course, if I say too high of a number, then they're like, oh, wow, no. But generally, I take that thing of change in, and you turn it in, and it's like, oh my goodness, that was way more money than I thought when I looked at it. It's just coins, some quarters and dimes, whatever. And it turns out to be like a significant amount of money. Like, what if you took all the change, right? You've just been saving your change for a while, and you go and you get that cashed, however you want to get it. You get it in nice 20s and 10s and whatever, and you put it in an envelope, and you don't spend it for you. It's just it's your benevolence envelope. It's your serve others envelope. It's your whatever need God wants to use it for envelope. Like, I think that's a really cool idea. It's just spare change. You were going to do anything with it anyway. Maybe you would set aside a couple dollars each paycheck and just start building it up so that when somebody has a need, you could experience the joy of meeting that need. And that's what Paul says to them. Paul says, you guys, it's to your benefit to give. And so that's one thing I just throw out to you guys. Like, man, I think this would be pretty cool. The second thing I would say, and this is a little bit less specifically about money, but just being others focused in general, is be ready. Because Ephesians 2:10 says we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Like God already, think about it. Like, it says we're God's workmanship. Literally, we're like God's masterpiece. Okay? And God is transforming us to be like Christ. And what He wants us to do is He wants us to do good works that He has prepared in advance. And so that God's already got a list. He's like, okay, I'm crafting this guy named Brian. And you know what? I have this for Brian to do. And I don't have it for Sammy. I just have it for Brian. I got a different list for Sammy. I got a different list for Raylan. I got these things that I want them to do. Some good works that are really going to benefit other people. So God already has these things planned. So expect it. Be ready for it. I mean, in a way, like if it's so blessed to give, if it's so like God to give and to serve other people, I can see God being like, man, Haley, I got this great opportunity. I've been getting this. It's perfect. I've made you to do this, to meet this need. And then when it comes, God's like, here it is, and you're like, I don't want to do that. Like, what? Man. But God was so excited for you to do that, to meet that need. I knew you would do that again, but that's why I picked it. But man, be ready. Guys, we get to be on a mission with God. We get to be a part of what God wants to do in people's lives. And sometimes we're so wrapped up in ourselves and our lives, we forget who's really Lord. Is it me or is it Jesus? That Jesus wants to do something. Jesus wants to impact the world. That He wants to make a huge difference. That my life's not supposed to be about me. Jesus calls me to live my life for the benefit of others. Guys, I know it's easy to look out for number one. Right? Look out for me. And the whole world does that. That's what the world does. Who is going to live a sacrificial, others-focused life like Jesus did? Because that's what He calls us to. And I think He wants to do some incredible things through us this semester if we'll just surrender to Him. If we'll just be obedient to develop these Christ-like characteristics in our lives. And so again, it's just, as I close, I'd like you to just think about that for yourself. Not about everybody else, and I'm not asking you to fill out a report card or tell anybody, but just a matter of prayer. Maybe there's something tonight that God is calling you very specifically, like, hey, I really want you to grow in this. Then surrender that to Him. Be obedient. I mean, get some accountability. Maybe there's something, maybe you're not a generous person and you need to be, and maybe you need to tell one of your friends. Maybe you need somebody to pray for you. But this, it says, and man, you know, Paul does this a lot where he plays that Jesus card. And he comes back to this, and he says, you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though He was rich, yet for your sake He became poor, so that you by His poverty might become rich. That Jesus laid it all down for you, that your sins might be forgiven, that you might have life. And that's the same sacrificial life He invites us into. So I want to pray and close our time, and then the worship team's going to come and lead us just in a song of commitment, a time of maybe you need to pray, and just do business with the Lord, whatever it is that God's calling you to do. Just pray to be obedient and faithful to Him. Just as we close and reflect, Lord God, You are awesome and mighty. And we praise You. And Jesus, I think this side of heaven, Lord, I'm never going to understand all that You've done and the price that You paid and the glory that You set aside so that you would become poor so that we could become rich. But God, I'm thankful that You did, and I'm thankful that You invite us and You grant opportunities for us to live that out. And God, really, You set us free from the slavery to stuff, the slavery to money, the slavery to self, that we can be free just to live a life of service, of giving. God, I pray that You would work in us integrity, that You'd work in us generosity, that You would work in us servanthood, that wherever we go, we would be the sweet aroma of Christ, and that we could really show what You're like, and that through that You would draw people to Yourself and You would be glorified, Lord. We love You. I pray, God, for great fruit this semester. I ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.